Welcome back to Plow and Pantry, y'all. Today I am harvesting and preserving some of my radishes from the garden. I came across this recipe for honey pickled radishes a while ago, and I stashed it for my fall radishes. It comes from rootsandboots.com. I will link that below. I've really been enjoying pickled vegetables in my salads lately and on tacos too, and so I wanted to try these. My love for pickled vegetables started a while ago when I tried pickled red onions a few years ago, and I kind of became addicted to that little punch of flavor and crunch in some things. Now all sorts of pickled vegetables sound good to me. Fresh radishes are something I can only take in small doses, but I find that if they're cooked or pickled or added to other things, and a lot of the spiciness goes away and I enjoy the flavor more. So this recipe sounded right up my alley. As I'm harvesting some of my radishes, you can see that I've let a few, meaning most of them, get way too big. Between regular busyness and Hurricane Helene, I just didn't get out there when I should have, and I was worried that these would be too woody because they were so big, but they turned out to be just fine. Some of them had like little air pocket things in the middle, but they were still usable and tasty, and their texture was way better than I thought it would be. I'm mostly pulling French breakfast radishes, which are my favorite, but I've never let them get this big, so it was definitely a different look than I've ever seen before. I swear, if you let radishes go even 3 days past their normal size, they get gigantic. I also pulled a black radish. I forgot what kind it is, so I'll try to remember to look at my seed stash and put it on the screen here. And I pulled a couple daikon radishes. That's the purple one you see there. There are lots of different types of daikons. The white one is also a daikon. I was wanting a mix of types and colors for this just because I thought it would be pretty, not because it's necessary. I also mixed in some regular small red ones from the grocery store that I had in my fridge. They needed to be used up, and I figured they would just add variety here. I pull off the radish tops before I put most of the root itself in my little blue bucket there. Radish tops are edible, but they are not my favorite thing, so I just feed them to the chickens. Also, the small red ones you get in the store have a smoother, more spinachy type leaf. These ones are a bit prickly and very, very peppery, so I don't like their texture or their flavor really. Once I get them inside, I get them scrubbed up really well, and then I slice them thinly using my mandolin. And yes, I am using mine without the finger guard. I find that guard makes things just really hard for me. No need for a safety lesson here. I will take a suggestion, however, for a new mandolin. This one is about 25 years old. I got it at Big Lots back when it was still Pick and Save. Do you remember that? It's just now starting to have some problems, so I'm keeping an eye out for a replacement, so if you have a mandolin that you love, leave me the information in the comments so I can check it out. I'd appreciate that. Just a word about safe canning recipes here. This is a recipe I found on a blog. It is not from Ball or the National Center for Home Food Preservation or any site that I can find where it's tested. So you need to do your own research with what you feel comfortable with here. The more you can, the more you learn about canning, the better decisions you can make. For me, canning for almost life and a lot of schooling related stuff to it, I was comfortable with it. The ratio of vinegar to water in this recipe, plus I always use 5% acidity or higher vinegar for canning, I was comfortable making this, but that is not an endorsement for you to do so. Think for yourself. If you want to try this recipe but it makes you nervous, you can always just put them in the refrigerator instead of on the shelf once they've cooled. They should actually last a few months in the fridge. This recipe called for 2 pounds of radishes. I actually weighed these out. I normally am not that detailed. It took a lot more radishes than I thought it would. It was almost my entire bucket there. And after they were all sliced, they went into a saltwater brine for 2 hours in the refrigerator. In the interest of full disclosure, I did have to run a kid to practice, so they were in there for actually about 3 hours. The recipe called for 2. I don't think it makes a difference. Then I got the jars in the canner to sterilize, and I got the pickling brine going in a pot on the stove. It's a simple vinegar honey brine. I did use less peppercorns than the recipe calls for because I only had 1 tablespoon on hand and it calls for 2 tablespoons. And I wasn't loving all the extra pepper anyway. That's not important for canning safety, so you can adjust pepper. That is like black peppercorns, not peppers like red peppers or anything. That's a different story. While the pickling liquid was boiling, I got the radishes out of the fridge and rinsed them. I used that time as an opportunity to mix them up a bit as well so that each jar would have a variety. This recipe says that it makes 6 to 8 half-pint jars, and I found that was right on the money. I always put extra jars in to sterilize if a recipe is new to me, because I find that a lot of recipes are off. Sometimes they are way off in the amount that it says it will make, and sometimes the amount of brine is also off. But I put these in pint jars instead of half-pint jars and got 3 of them. And since the recipe calls for half pints, making 6 to 8 jars, that would be the exact equivalent. So it was perfect. And I had the right amount of brine too. I think I had like about 2 tablespoons probably left over, so that was great as well. I packed these jars really tight and was halfway done pouring over the brine when I realized that my camera had shut off for some reason. So sorry you're only seeing half of that process here, but I did pack the radishes in really tight and put the liquid over in layers, 1 scoop at a time, because these jars are full of nooks and crannies. It takes a minute or 2 for the liquid to work its way into those. If you just dump liquid on top, it'll overflow on top and then work its way down, and then you'll have a mess, and then you'll also still need to top off your jars. So I did like 1/3 of a ladle full to start off with, and then debubbled and topped off again. Because like I said, there's a lot of spaces where air bubbles can get trapped, and you don't want that. That can cause broken jars in the canner. After they were properly debubbled and topped off to a 1/4 inch headspace with brine covering the radishes, I wiped the rims with vinegar and got my lids and rings on, fingertip tight as always. Someone asked me in a recent video why fingertip tight was so important. It's because you want the rings tight enough to hold the lids on until they seal, but you need it loose enough for air bubbles to escape while you're canning, or it won't create the vacuum, and that vacuum is important for food safety. It can also make the lids buckle instead of sealing correctly, which is also something you don't want, so fingertip tight every time you can. These went in the canner for 15 minutes for me. This is a water bath recipe that calls for 10 minutes, but I'm above 1,000 feet, so I have to adjust for altitude. I also let them settle in the canner for 5 minutes after I turn off the heat before I remove them from the canner. These were absolutely beautiful, and I did open a jar to taste them the next morning so that I could report to you that they are pretty darn good. They will definitely be something I make regularly when I have radishes to harvest. I made these thinking they would be good on salad, and I'm sure they will be, but I also tried them on their own and on a burrito that I made with leftover roast beef and rice, and they were the perfect addition to that. So that is it for today's canning recipe. In the next few days, I have some more gardening and food preservation videos coming up. We are expecting our first frost soon, and I need to get some things out of the garden and into the kitchen, so I hope you'll join me for that. I also have more October Freezer Challenge videos coming up, so if those types of videos spark your curiosity, make sure you subscribe. And if you like this video, it also really helps me out. Thanks for spending some of your precious few minutes with me, and I hope that the rest of your day is pretty darn fabulous.